If I'm an employee of a company, I will take a survey every day. If the employer listens to that feedback and takes action on it, that's the problem. Is that where there's no not only feedback loop but also actions that are taking place. So for those companies that are worried about it, go through the filter first to be able to say, instead of quantifying the number of surveys, talk about how you're going to act on the first one.
Good morning, HR. I'm Mike Coffey, president of Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. And this is the podcast where I talk to business leaders about bringing people together to create value for shareholders, customers, and the community. Please follow, rate, and review Good Morning HR wherever you get your podcast. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, or at goodmorninghr.com. If you evaluate modern workplaces based on social media posts, especially TikTok and Reddit, you might have the idea that most employees simply want to do their time at work each day, doing as little work as possible, earning a fair wage or more, and then simply disconnect from their job at the end of their shift. However, studies have repeatedly shown that employees want to be engaged at work. They need to know that they're seen, understood, and that what they do matters. My guest today says that leaders should focus on creating cultures where employees affirmatively answer the question, is my life better because I work here? Mark Mohammadpour is the founder of Chasing the Sun, through which he helps companies design cultures of well-being, retain healthy employees, and create a healthy bottom line. Mark spent a career in communications leading programs for organizations like Adobe, Microsoft, and the U.S. Army. And now, through Chasing the Sun, Mark works to empower people to shine. Welcome to Good Morning HR, Mark.
Good morning, Mike. Good morning, HR. It's an honor to be here.
Well, thank you for being here. And let's just start with that first question. Is my life better because I work here? Why is that an important question for leaders to ask?
Every day, Mike, I'm hearing from people who are reimagining their relationship with work. And we've seen this over the last few years if we've shifted our relationship with work, everything from where we physically sit at to our roles, to our purpose, and to our tenure. And it's these questions that people are asking every day. And they're thinking about it not just in terms of their salary and their compensation, which is important, but also, am I sleeping well at night? Do I have enough money to take care of my children in daycare? Do I have enough in healthcare insurance? Am I able to take time off away from work, even though financially I may be able to? Do I feel empowered to do so and still feel safe coming back? All of this, Mike, ties into the well-being of the employees, and it's getting people every day to ask, is my life better the rest of my life because I work at this organization?
So, in your changing it, I mean, is my life better because I work here? Because most of the conversations seem to have traditionally been, is this job taking something away from me? Is this job costing me something by being here? And I think a lot of the work-life balance, which I think is, I think that's not the way to look at it. I think it's all, for most of us, is a work-life integration. We've got different priorities at different times. But, most of the time those conversations are about, how is work getting in the way of doing what I want to do? And you're talking about making life better. And some of that's, some of the things you mentioned, like psychological safety and the ability to take care of the business you need to take care of personally. What are other things that really kind of drive in a culture making somebody's life better?
I think one of the interesting things, Mike, we've also seen in this shift in how we're working, where traditionally people would come into an office or go to a physical place of work and do their job and then come home. We've seen over the last few years this evolution of realizing, for a long time actually, society has caught up to technology over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years, that for a lot of us, we can do jobs independent of a physical location. And we have also seen companies making decisions as far as, well, maybe that's not best for the company. Well, is it? Are we asking, do our customers care about where we are physically at? So these are the questions that not only employees are asking, but employers are starting to think about this as well. And we've had this monumental shift over the last few years with the pandemic and getting people to reimagine their relationship with work. But the other part of this, Mike, and when we talk about company culture, and one of the things I talk about in my keynotes and my workshops and consulting with companies is there's company culture, big picture, where you're talking about your mission, vision, values, benefits the company offers. But really, Mike, it comes down to the people you're spending a lot of the time with. And it doesn't matter if you're working in a company with 10 employees or 10,000. Your relationship with your company are going to be the people you're spending most of the time with. It's going to be your manager, people that you're managing, the department you're in, your geography, your clients, your customers, your external partners. That is your relationship with your company. And that is how we are starting to see our relationship with work evolve beyond just what does it say at the enterprise level, but at the team level. What does culture mean? What does our experience mean? And from a well-being standpoint, how are we thinking about why is our life working here through that lens? And that's the challenge that I pose to the HR community and executives when they're thinking about really lasting changes with employee culture and well-being.
How much of this is data driven? How much data do we really know, whether it's surveys and, everybody wants to go to Glassdoor and look at, review this company before they take the job. But do we have good information? I know Gallup does a lot of interesting workplace stuff. What does the data tell? I mean, is there hard data out there that leaders can really point to if they want to start making these changes?
Well, I think one of the first things is, our world in HR, and I come from the communications world where we are constantly having to prove our worth and the bottom line. And I'll just start with the biggest bottom line is that it costs more money to replace people than it is to take care of them. And this is data from SHRM. It can cost up to twice as somebody's salary to replace them. And that's not just in reputational costs. That's in productivity costs. It's in paying recruiters. It's in advertising. And then it's potentially lost relationships with customers who had a good relationship with that employee. And a fraction of the cost likely to keep them, whether it's training, benefits, and just overall awareness of communication between the employee and the employer as far as what their relationship is like and what those employees need. That alone is a significant data point that we need to make sure that we are delivering to executives. Because in their mind, and rightfully so, they need to be thinking about the bottom line. They need to be thinking about their shareholders. But the more that we can tie the reputational impact of retaining employees and keeping them, and also thinking about them beyond when they leave. And that's part of the whole employee journey. And we think about communications, everything from what is written on the job description, what's written on the website, what is the recruiter talking about as far as the company is concerned, all the way through when they leave and how they feel. Collectively, that has such an impact on the bottom line. So that's one data point. I think the other data point, which it seems a bit completely different direction, but I just want to discuss, is just we are leaving weeks and weeks of paid time off on the table. The U.S. Travel Association says that we are leaving more than 700 million days of paid time off in the United States alone. And that has a ripple effect, ripple effect on our productivity and ultimately people's interest in staying. And so that's just one example of a benefit. And if we can work to communicate with our work streams in a way that's relatable, practical, actionable, for that alone, that's just one extra data point around time off and empowering people to take time off. We can retain employees, keep them healthier, and ultimately make the company more money or reach whatever business objectives they have.
Yeah, and you've mentioned the term well-being several times. How do you measure that? How do I know if there's a sense of well-being in my organization? And let me ask also, as you define it, what's the opposite of well-being? Please don't say toxic because I'm so tired of that term. But what's the opposite of falling short at least of well-being?
Well, I see a well-being as scalable, right? So we don't necessarily need a word to replace it. So let's look in terms of, to your point about about data. I think to take a step back, when I launched Chasing the Sun, it was primarily around physical health. And it came from a weight loss journey. Kept off more than 150 pounds. And
Wow.
I lost and kept that off. No shakes, no
you.
pills.
Yeah.
Thank you. And that was part of this journey. But as I started launching the company and started talking to people about well-being, there are opportunities to look beyond physical health. And so I have started to look at broader well-being, and I think about it in terms similar to the US Surgeon General, who has released guidance around well-being, and that's around physical health, mental health, career well-being, thinking about the tenure of your career and how does the company support that. The community aspect, so those physically around you in the community, and how often are you able to give back, because we can be more empathetic by being around those who are more vulnerable and giving back time. From a social aspect, a lot of data talking about isolation. There's this article in the New York Times recently about that, and we have seen that evolve. And so from a company standpoint, how are we supporting people working in different places? I think we need 4 workspaces. I think we need a physical location where, if we have that allowed for us to be an office or a workspace, we need a place where we are alone at home, where we are working and being productive. We need a social environment, like at a coffee shop, somewhere or a library, where we have, people around us and there's that kind of different energy. And then we need a place where we're off our devices and we are just by ourselves in a park, in a forest, and we're thinking. We need, and so that's in itself is around that social well-being. And then there's the financial well-being, and thinking through the stress levels of those that we're working with, and making sure that they're aware of the financial benefits that are related. Now, tied to that, to your point about the measurement, and this is really situational, which is why this takes work. This takes work to really drive a lot of impact. I think one of the things that can intimidate companies, no matter what level you're at or what department you're at, but we're talking with the HR audience, is how do we shift our company culture? That's a very broad and can be very overwhelming area. So what I work with companies on is to create pilots around a particular work stream where there might be a particular challenge. So for instance, there might be a work stream in which there are certain benefits not being used. And so we could measure the impact of increase in certain benefits being used, whether that's paid time off, whether that's therapy that's being offered, whether that's particular financial advisor, usage being amplified. And then that's the objective, that's the measurable objective. And then we go through, okay, what are the tactics? And then what are the communications channels in which we're going to do that? Again, back to the work stream part of it, how we work with one work stream and communicating benefits and their needs are going to be different from another. It's going to depend on the work stream, your physical location, the demands of your job, how you receive information. All of these go into whether or not we can create a healthy culture, because we have to think through the lens of the employees and the reality of how they receive information and how they like to connect with the company.
And let's take a quick break. Good Morning HR is brought to you by Imperative, bulletproof background checks with fast and friendly service. Way back in the 1990s, I led a corporate HR team that was tasked with standardizing how one of the largest healthcare systems in Texas operated their HR. And quite honestly, that was the fun part of the job. But they also gave my team management of a lot of the outsourced HR services, including background checks, which quickly became one of my biggest headaches. In order to manage that process, I had to become an expert in background checks from the HR side of the desk. And once I figured it out, I admittedly rode our background screening partner pretty hard. So when I founded Imperative several years later, 26 years ago, I dedicated our efforts to serving employers for whom a quick and cheap background check just wasn't good enough. And that continues to be our focus today, helping our clients make well-informed decisions about the people they involve in their business. You can learn more or reach out to us directly at imperativeinfo.com. If you're an HRCI or SHRM certified professional, this episode of Good Morning HR has been pre-approved for 1/2 hour of recertification credit. To obtain the recertification information, visit goodmorninghr.com and click on Research Credits. Then select episode 186 and enter the keyword CHASE. That's CHASE. And if you're looking for even more recertification credit, check out the webinars page at imperativeinfo.com. And now back to my conversation with Mark Mohammadpour. And so, like you said, we all went remote in 2020, and for some of us that was just weeks long. And I'm in Texas, and by June or July, we were kissing strangers on the street on the mouth. It was over here, and we weren't doing it anymore. But a lot of companies stayed remote, but we just the COVID wasn't we weren't as locked down as other places. Other places stayed locked down and fully remote for a year, and employees really got to set that expectation, or they had that expectation set. And now it's all over the place. My company, we stayed fully remote. I've got folks all over the place, and we've invested in the technology and the security and all the things that are involved there. A lot of companies are doing some sort of hybrid, and you're hearing about some large companies that were doing hybrid in office 1 day a week. Now they're moving it to 2 days a week. Now they're moving it back to RTO 3 days a week or full time. How do you know as a leader what the right balance is for your organization, based on what you have to do and the people you have and what their expectations are?
Yeah. So two parts. It's a great question. There's two parts to that. I think the first is, if you're going to have people come into the office, there better be a very unique purpose that is different than any other experience. There better be a reason, and there are reasons. It's difficult to brainstorm virtually. You can do it as a group. You can brainstorm, and there's the technology available, and you can have discussions, and you can have scribes to be able to do. But there's nothing like getting together and brainstorming and going deep on particular problems. So the opportunity for executives is, what are the scenarios? And this would something that I would work with companies on is, what are 3, 5, 7 scenarios in which we need to be in the office for? It could be for a brainstorm. It could be we are preparing for a big announcement, a big product or big initiative, and we're going to be in the office for the next 3 weeks, or just making this up. And we're going to be heads down on that. And this is the reason why. What are those scenarios? So that, again, the employee understands that this is going to be a different experience versus coming into the office, and let's say you're in an office of 200 people, and 180 of them have their doors shut all day because they're on calls. Different experience. What's the point, right? Another scenario could be, we are going to have very prescriptive times that we are together to have conversations, to learn from one another, and they could be as informal as pizza time happy hours, or they can be much more formal, and we're going to learn about the business from one another. And we're going to, this thing I've worked with companies as well, is, what's your professional development plan within your employee base? Not even just having outside people coming in delivering professional development, but we have so much to learn from one another. What are the opportunities to do that? And then out of that comes networking and getting to know each other and things like that. So that's one part of it. But I think the one group that we forget to discuss when it comes to the return to office discussion, what does the customer need? Mm-hmm. Does the customer need us to come into the office? Again, coming back to having this discussion with employees and understanding why we're having people come in. It's one thing just to say, oh, we need you to come in because it's more productive, or it's better. Collaborative, these kind of vague words. If we are hearing from 30%, 50, 70% of our customers that are saying, look, your teams were much better when you were all in the office, or we are missing this, or some either quantifiable or even anecdotal feedback to be able to discuss with the employees, that's important. I think we miss that a lot when we're just communicating to employees that we need people back for morale and for connectedness. And I'm not saying that's not important, but we need to discuss this through the lens of the customer and what's important to them. I think that's a missing element that needs to be brought up more.
Yeah, because we are, at the end of the day, in business to execute a mission. And if you're for profit, well, even if you're not for profit, it's to deliver service to a specific customer that you serve in a unique way. And my clients are spread all over the country. They never walk in the office. And as long as, and our big goal is that the phone gets answered if somebody has a call, that we know our customers well enough to anticipate the questions so they don't have to call us and all those things. And we found that we do that really well remote or in person. And we've been able to bring on new employees and incorporate them into that culture remotely. It works for us. But I have clients who've done everything they can to try and do that remote and either and I've talked about on the podcast before. It's I've got a son who's now 25 and he's an engineer, and he was actively he just recently he was with a great company that was fully on site because of the kind of work they did and the security clearances and all that, and he loved that because he had good mentorship. And in his next role, that was really important to him that he have that mentorship. And so if it was fully remote, he would have been less interested in the role. He's got an amazing job. He's actually designing stuff, and this is me bragging, designing stuff for the lunar rover that they're going to put on the moon in like 2026 or 7 or something. And I mean, it's an amazing job, right? He gets to do it. So that's his proud dad talk. But how do you've got different employee groups who want different things. You've got clients to balance and all of that. And I guess that's the leader's dilemma. How do we balance these things? And maybe it means either not every client in the future is going to be an ideal fit for you, or maybe not every employee, no matter how qualified they are, is going to be the right culture fit. How do you balance all that? What are your thoughts there?
Well, first, congratulations to your son. I'm a big space exploration fan. So kudos. And
I'm glad
that's a
to see us
wonderful.
going back to the moon with something. Yeah.
I love, right, right.
Yeah.
Well, I love this because your son is mid-20s, different
Yeah.
generation, and yet wants to come into the office, want that mentorship. That's another thing. We have to sort of evolve past this generation versus generation differences. And there's a graphic that I've used in some of my talks around. There was a magazine cover from the 1970s, 1990s, 2010s, and 2020s about the future generation, and all of the words that were described very similar to what we talk about as far as future generations.
Right.
So we need to sort of evolve this. It's important to learn if there are some nuances and differences, but we're all just people, and we all have sort of the same challenges growing up, and we also crave that mentorship. We crave that attention. So I just want to share that. I'm so glad to hear that your son is very descriptive as far as what he wants in a future
Mhm.
relationship. And I think that's part to answer your question. That's part of the opportunity that we have. And again, coming back to the employee journey, as we think about the job description, the website, how we talk about the company, the recruiter, the hiring manager, the onboarding, each of those steps we typically think of as a test for the employee or the prospective employee. They're also a test for the employer. How are we talking about the company? How consistent are we with when we talk about the employee experience? How consistent are we when we talk about the culture within a particular work stream? When communicating benefits within the company? When we're talking about trainings and opportunities? And when we are thinking in terms of, to your point about customers and what their needs are, one of the things I work with teams on is thinking through the perspective of not only ourselves, but also our customers. What are their challenges? What do they need? I call it creating an empathy map, and it's an exercise where we go through, and this works within your team. It works with executives of your company and your customers. What are their goals? What are their ambitions? How are they influenced? Right? What are their needs? And the more we can have those discussions and ultimately tie them back to the individual, the employee's needs, the better. A lot of this comes down to communication, Mike. And it sounds like a lot of extra steps, but back to how we're measuring this, the companies that I see that have clear, concise, consistent communication at every stage of the employee journey are the ones that are going to keep happy employees. They're going to be productive. They're going to do right by the customers and ultimately right by the company. And then obviously that's going to come back to the employee as a result.
And you mentioned something, you called it, I think, an empathy map.
Yeah.
Talk more about that. That's interesting.
Yeah. So I have whole keynotes and discussions around empathy, and there's multiple different types of empathy, but the one I'm talking about is primarily the understanding, right? There's one part of empathy that's like, I'm literally feeling how you're feeling. This is more about the understanding of somebody. And this is something that I had to learn quite a bit throughout my career. I worked primarily on an agency side, working with big brands, and sometimes there would be a big change at a company, or a big pivot was being made, or a big campaign that we were working on suddenly is delayed, and it would get frustrating. It would impact your confidence. We would be 2, 3, 4 degrees away from the decision makers, and I didn't have then what I do now, is being able to feel compelled to ask why, what's the motivation, what is the business impact, and a number of questions that might seem very obvious. But the more degrees you are away from the executive bench, board of directors, other influencers, the more that the information that you have about particular situations at your company becomes more vague. How does this all impact well-being? Well, it impacts confidence, it impacts sleep, it impacts our anxiety about the business. I've seen a number of executives not wanting to share financials with junior staff, or folks in the profession, because we don't want to scare them. These are adults. They can do all typical adult things, and we can't trust them with numbers for a company that they're working for, that they're advocates for.
And I think that's one of the things is people are often, in the absence of information, are often going to assume it's worse than it really is.
Correct. So it's
That's just, I
better
think, our
to
human nature. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's better to be upfront. So really, these are conversations that are important to have with not only your immediate team, your manager. How are they influenced? What are their goals? We should be having discussions with our employees, what they're thinking about it, and then again, think through the lens of the executive and what's their motivation. And that takes some work. It takes some questions. It might take some chatting with executive assistants. It might take some chatting with their peers. I'm not trying to say that this is a sort of covert operation or anything like that, but this is about research about people and what's important to them. That impacts everything from, again, ultimately how we feel, to our relationship with the company, and everything in between.
Well, and you talked about asking that why, and that's one of the things in my HR consulting practice over the years. Clients often come and say, "We want to implement an employee satisfaction survey," and they just want something out of the box, just to throw out there, check the KPI off. We did 3 employee satisfaction surveys this year, but my question is always why? What is the issue driving this? Why do you want to do this? And what do you want to get out of it? What's the goal? I mean, if the information comes back positive or negative, how do you plan to use it? How are you going to implement it? And do you have the buy-in from the executives to do whatever you need to get where you want it to go? And I think that's, I'm an entrepreneur, so it's easier for me because I'm always looking to solve the problem, and I want to understand the problem. I think for a lot of your frontline managers, your frontline employees, they're not thinking that way. By default, it's more like, give me this task and I'll do this task. And, it's coming from, on high down to them. And so they'll do the task, but maybe they're not putting everything into it, that discretionary effort that we call employee engagement, because they don't understand the why. So how do you think that why should get down from the decision makers to the front line?
Well, I think it comes down to, again, your relationship with your company. And you said it so well, right? If I don't know why I'm doing it, I'm just doing it. I'm ticking a box. I'll just do the job and all. And let's be honest. There are some people who operate that way, and we need to make sure it's okay, right? There's an agreement between the employee and the employer that they're doing a task, and they're compensated for that task. There are going to be certain people that have elevated or different levels of connectiveness and engagement, and we want to make sure that we are empowering those folks to do that. And again, a lot of that comes down to communication about why decisions are made, about what this means for you, about what the opportunity is for you. One area would be around career growth, back to career well-being. How many times in our respective careers and lives have we seen a manager-employee relationship sort of go sour because that employee doesn't see an opportunity to grow, maybe that manager doesn't want them to grow. Don't mean to be cynical, but I've seen this.
Right. Well, yeah, you don't want to lose this talent. This guy is great at
Oh,
turning this wrench, right? And I don't want to lose that great wrench turner to another department or moving up the chain.
exactly. I've counted on that person for years. I can't take on their chat. No one else can do it as good as they do. Well, what happens? Not only do they leave the team, they leave the entire organization.
Mhm.
And so that comes from a place of insecurity. And we need to make sure that managers understand their role, right? And understand that, look, their role is to really help get a job done, right? As defined, to be able to empower people to grow in a way that works for them. So we need to make sure that we're putting this in respect. And you have some people who want to be lifers within a team, but let's also make sure we're having those discussions early and often with our employees. Back to your point about surveys, I've heard from some companies who say, "Oh, we're worried about surveying our employees too much." Look, if I'm an employee of a company, I will take a survey every day. If the employer listens to that feedback and takes action on it, that's the problem. Is that there's no not only feedback loop, but also actions that are taking place. So for those companies that are worried about it, go through the filter first to be able to say, instead of quantifying the number of surveys, talk about how you're going to act on the first one. And then you will see change. Then you will see people okay with taking those surveys. Forget about how long the surveys are, forget about the frequency. Focus on the work that's going to be done to listening to the results. And then back to the employee-employee relationship and back to the culture of well-being, it's one thing for the chief executive or the C-suite to talk about the survey data. It's to compartmentalize that for your work stream, right? This is what we're seeing. And even if you don't have the survey by work stream or by department, but be able to contextualize that feedback and have a discussion and be able to say, how do you feel about this, and make it a safe environment and be able to discuss at that work stream level, what are some things that we can adjust? That's a critical part of this whole process. And again, back to engagement, back to having people feel heard, ultimately makes for a positive experience for everybody.
So, just to kind of wrap this up, we're running short on time, but if I'm a leader and let's say we're profitable, we don't have high turnover, our as far as we can tell, anecdotally, our employees seem to not hate us and like to come to work. We don't have a lot of employee relations issues, those kind of things. But I want to get a good pulse for really what is our wellness level? How healthy are we? Would that be a survey, or what would you say look at first?
I think it's three parts. It's first, and this will obviously have in conjunction with HR, an understanding of the benefits being used by your work stream.
Okay.
And there's a lot of data out there that talks about the big delta in what companies offer versus what employees use. So getting a sense of that. And then as part of that, are your employees aware of those benefits? And again, this comes down to communication. If you think about yourself as a buyer of a product, how many points in time do you need to hear about that before you make a decision? It's very similar with benefits, open
Mhm.
enrollment, everything, right? As far as that's concerned. So you tie that to the conversations that I think it's a quantifiable and qualifiable discussion with your specific employees, and you're maybe working with the HR department or your employees commerce department about 3 to 5 questions that are very specific to your work stream around how they're feeling, and tie that with some conversations that you're having with them. And I think between those three, right, understanding the benefits that are being used, because
Mhm.
that's part of compensation, your quantifiable data based on a pulse survey that's defined specifically for your work stream, and then conversations with a select group. And then let's look at that data and identify what are 2 or 3 things that we can put together as a pilot to be able to make some adjustments as needed. And that's what I would then implement over the next 3-6 months, and come back and see how the results look.
So we plan, do, check, act. We get
Yep.
our data, we implement something, see what the results are, revisit it, and make adjustments and try it again. Perfect.
Absolutely.
Well, hey, that's a great place to end it. Thank you for joining me today, Mark.
Thank you, Mike. It's a pleasure.
And thank you for listening. You can comment on this episode or search our previous episodes at goodmorninghr.com or on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube. And don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcast. Rob Upchurch is our technical producer, and you can reach him at robmakespods.com. And thank you to Marianne Hernandez, Imperatives Marketing Coordinator, who keeps the trains running on time. And I'm Mike Coffey, as always. Don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service to you personally or professionally. I'll see you next week, and until then, be well, do good, and keep your chin up.